Welcome, everyone. Just a reminder, we are going to be recording today's session, so if you don't want to be recorded, you can disable the camera function on your computer or laptop. Please select Gallery View in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on an iPad, that's in the upper left. We are compiling a directory, so if you want to be a part of that directory, you can write your name, where you're located, who you studied with in the chat box at the bottom. And also, if you're a teacher and want to be noted as such, please just indicate that with your information, along with if you have a website that you want to be able to reference, you can put that in the chat as well, and we'll put all that in the directory. At the conclusion of today's Tai Chi, we're going to have a discussion on separate weight. And in that discussion, if you have something you'd like to say, if you can wave your hand, and if we don't recognize you, just go ahead and hit your space bar and speak up. If more than one person speaks at a time, we're going to get garbled audio. So if that happens, please just be considerate and somebody back off and let the other person speak, because it's just difficult visually to monitor 4 pages of people all at once. So we'll do the best we can, but if everybody can be very cooperative in taking the floor and yielding the floor, I think things will run more smoothly. I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm Michael Ward in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And our co-host Redmond Entwistle is at the controls in London. Morning, Redmond.
Hi, Mike. Morning. Hi, everyone.
We'd like to thank you all for coming today and joining with other students practicing Tai Chi in the lineage of Chengmen Cheng. These sessions began as a way to connect during a time of social isolation and have since evolved into a forum for sharing more of our Tai Chi practice in a spirit of fellowship and scholarship. We meet here every Wednesday at the same time. Please share the details of the sessions and how to connect with your students, classmates, teachers. You're welcome to attend just the top of the hour where we do the Tai Chi, but each week this is going to be followed by a discussion either of an element of Tai Chi practice with our guest leader or on an aspect of Chinese culture as related to Professor Cheng. In the coming weeks, every week we're going to mail out an email on Monday, which will reiterate the topic of the following Wednesday, as well as let everyone know about what's going to come in the subsequent week. That way, if it's a discussion topic, it'll give you some time to gather your thoughts and contribute to the discussion. We are also going to put in that newsletter a link to the previous week's session. So when we do record these sessions, if you have to miss one and you want to catch it, the link will be in the email that goes out on Monday. Just a reminder, next week, July 29th, the first third will be led by Maria Grazia Franzoni in Italy. And this will be followed by a lecture led by Barbara Davis on Professor Chengmen Cheng's paintings. At the age of 22, Professor Cheng attained a very high level of mastery in the traditional 3 excellences of painting, poetry, and calligraphy. And Barbara will be discussing Professor's art career and showing slides of his paintings. This week, as always, we'll follow a video of Professor Chengmen Cheng doing the first third of his form, video shot by Ken Van Sickle, and we thank him for that. We'll do that twice, and then we'll be going this week to Bob Burke, who will lead us through the final first third. Redmond will be announcing the postures as we go. At the conclusion of the Tai Chi, we'll start the discussion of Separate the Weight with Redmond reading a little bit from a couple of the books on Tai Chi, and then we'll go to Bob for his opening comments, and then we're going to open it up to everybody for the discussion. So thank you, and if you can just step away and get ready, we'll get ready to begin.
Preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw.
It's recording this.
Push. Cross hands. And back to the beginning, to preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. Cross hands.
Great. We'll now be going to Bob Burke to lead the final first third. Bob lives in New Haven, Connecticut. He's a third generation student professor, having received instruction in the solo practice, push hands and sword in Salt Lake City during the 1980s from Jack Livingston, a student of Saul Krotke of the Shizhong School. These days in retirement, Bob practices Tai Chi with many members of the 55 and over community where he lives. So we'll take it to you now, Bob.
Morning, and thank you for this privilege of leading the group. I'll do it with my back to the camera, as we've been doing recently, so that people can follow along, and with the left and the right hand side coordinating together. So let's begin.
Back on my video, huh?
Beginning. Raise hands. Order left. Water right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. Cross hands.
I'd like to give a shout out to my 96-year-old mother, who knows enough about Zoom to be dangerous. She's watching this morning. Hi, Mom.
Great, great. Thanks, Bob. That was wonderful. We're going to start off the discussion of the principles separate the weight with Redmond reading a passage. And then we'll go back and have Bob share a few of his thoughts, and then we're going to open it up to everyone for a discussion. So Redmond, you want to read your passage?
So these are two passages from Ben Lowe's translation of the Tai Chi Chuan classics. The first one's from Yang Cheng Fu's 10 important points, and it's point number 4. Differentiate insubstantial and substantial. This is the first thing of all in Tai Chi Chuan. If the weight of the whole body is resting on the right leg, then the right leg is substantial and the left leg is insubstantial, and vice versa. When you can separate substantial and insubstantial, you can turn lightly without using strength. If you cannot separate them, the step is heavy and slow. The stance is not firm and can be easily thrown off balance. And then going back to passage from Tai Chi Chuan Lun by Wang Sungyue. Stand like a balance and rotate actively like a wheel. Sinking to one side is responsive. Being double-weighted is sluggish or stagnant. Anyone who has spent years of practice and still cannot neutralize and is always controlled by his opponent has not apprehended the fault of double-weightedness. To avoid this fault, one must know yin and yang. Yin and yang mutually aid and change each other. I thought I'd just share it's next to a picture of Fu Xin, who I believe discovered the I Ching trigrams.
Thank you, Redmond. Bob, you had a few thoughts that we'd like to just start off the discussion with, if you'd like to share them now.
Yes, my thoughts follow along with what some of the things Redmond wrote. I think the professor said, from what I've read of his writings, that the changing from substantial to insubstantial and back again is to be done carefully so that the chi will flow without hindrance through the body. And I think that's an important thing. And then there's one other extension of this that I found in the Wolf Lowenthal book, There Are No Secrets, where he talked about some of his recollections from his conversations with the professor. He wrote this, and it had to do with balance and rooting. Tai Chi movement comes from being balanced and rooted in the non-stepping foot. This leads to much greater stability and alertness, a reason why it's so hard to take a good Tai Chi player by surprise, as well as why the practitioner can be so relaxed. The quality of cat-like alertness, which he called Ling, should be the state of the Tai Chi practitioner when he is standing still, sitting, or resting. When standing, the weight should be primarily on one leg rather than evenly distributed on both legs. With weight on one leg, movement can be instantaneous.
Great. Thank you. We'll open it up to everyone now. Anyone who has a thought you'd like to share on the idea of separating the weight, thoughts on how one does it, how you can practice this principle, or any other thoughts on separate the weight, please feel free to speak up now.
Let's see. I'd like to talk a little bit about Ben Lowe, who's my teacher, and about his approach to single-weightedness, if I may. He stressed that that was his second principle. Relax was the first one. Separate yin and yang was his second principle. And for anybody that took a class from him, you know that he stressed it very diligently. I think the best way to talk about that is actually to demonstrate, or if people want to stand up and do it with me, it's very enlightening because it really tests your single-weightedness. So if we're doing this is what he would do with us all the time in classes. So if we're doing let's see, roll back. So if we're doing roll back, if you're in roll back and you sit back and you do roll back and you get to here, now right at this point you're supposed to be single weighted. So he would have us pick up our foot, and the idea is for all the movements. So if you're single weighted, you should be able to pick up your foot, have single weightedness, keep it, sustain it, and have your weight, have your body vertical and be able to sustain that. And that should be through every move. So for every roll back, press, for push, stop here, push. You should be empty, have that front, whichever foot, completely empty. And he stressed that all the time, every class. And also in terms of um, push hands. In push hands, you need to have, that's an essential element of push hands, is to be single weighted. If you can't, that was that piece that that Redmond read about, you have to be single weighted in order to turn on an axis. So if you're doing, you can't neutralize without being completely single weighted. So you have to be, if you're going to be roll back and to neutralize someone, you have to be single weighted so that you can turn on an axis. So that's something he emphasized all the time, and also told us about how he practiced with how he learned from the professor, and the professor he took like weeks to learn one movement from the professor, and because the professor made sure he had had the whole movement perfectly, and then but particularly standing in the single weighted forms. So that was an essential element of everything that that Benno did. Okay.
Thank you. I heard a story once. I don't know if you can confirm it, but it was that that Ben Lowe, the only reason he got to progress past lifting hands was because the professor's wife intervened. That she had come into the room, and professor kept Ben repeating lifting hands over and over and over, and because he couldn't stand completely on one leg. And Mrs. Cheng came in one day and scolded him for not letting Ben move through the form. And professor said that, well, look at his leg. He's still wobbling. He can't go further. But that Mrs. Cheng implored on the professor to let him continue. And so Ben got to move through the form. But that's what the story that I had heard about that aspect, because lifting hands is the first time we really get 100-0 in a posture. I don't know if you had heard that about Ben or not.
Yes, he told that story many times. And yes, he said that that when Mr. Cheng went to the professor, he said, well, that's the way I learned, I could not progress through until I had, mastered each posture. And Mr. Cheng said, well, this is a different time now, and you have to let him go. You have to move him through the form, and a view on that whole thing is that professor said that Ben said it took him a long time to get each movement perfectly. And the professor would only demonstrate once for each movement. And one time Ben asked the professor to repeat something, and the professor said, "What, are you stupid? You can't learn? You can't see it right away and learn it." So that was the difference in culture, and in professor coming from a very traditional culture. And Ben was his first student in Taiwan, so then Ben got that very kind of rigid teaching.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, one of the ways that you're suggesting as a way to practice separate the weight is really in going through the form, being aware, not only aware of each place where we should be 100-0, but really picking up the empty foot to verify that we actually are doing what we think we're doing.
Yes, and there's one other thing that I didn't mention. The idea, when you pick up that foot and hold it, your body is not supposed to waver. So you're supposed to, when you pick up your foot, your body should be in exactly the same position. That shows that your body is aligned and in that position. So that's the way. If you were in any of his classes, like in a workshop, he would spend the first day going through lifting probably to Golden Cock or something like that. So he was very diligent about pursuing that piece.
I one time asked.
May I say something?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
there seems to me to be some confusion here. And the confusion is between single weightedness and rooting. So the way that you've described the movement, for example, in rollback, it seems to me that you said that you have to shift all the way so that you're single weighted and then begin to turn. But if you look at the original films from which the master tapes were taken, there's a segment in which Professor says that the beginning of the turn is hidden in the shifting. So there's a period of time during which you're shifting and turning. And this, I think, is necessary in order to prevent the creation of a hollow and a protrusion. If you're standing on one leg and you do the turn, then one shoulder is moving forward and one shoulder is moving back. But if you do the blending of the shifting and the turning correctly, then a shoulder stays still and the side of the body empties. And it's in that emptying of the side that the person is pushing on that neutralization is achieved. If you stand still and you turn, then you've presented the person with an opportunity to push in the form of the shoulder, which is moving forward. Mr. Liu said something about this also. I had it a moment ago, but I've forgotten. So, yeah.
No,
May I say
Liam, you mentioned the difference between single weighted and rooting. Can you say a little bit more about that distinction?
Yes, absolutely. If you're going to shift between two postures, you cannot be rooted only in 100% postures. You have to be rooted in 70-30, and you have to be rooted everywhere in between the two. And if you're rooted as you are doing the turn, then you don't have to turn on this central axis. You turn on the shoulder to foot axis.
May
Okay.
I, Mr.
Go ahead.
Kepner, I don't mean to disrespect you. Did you, I was at Shijung, and I don't think Professor would have used the word stupid. He was unfailingly polite and jovial, and it's just simply my opinion, but I'm sorry, don't like to see the word stupid ascribed to something the professor said.
Well, yeah, just from what Ben said, yeah, it definitely was, Ben definitely said that Professor called him stupid, but he also asked Ben, well, because you're so slow, how many times do you want me to repeat the posture instead of just one? And
Okay.
Ben, hey, Liam.
Hi.
Ben frightenedly asked him to repeat it 3 times. And much to Professor's disgust, that's what he did.
Okay, thank you. Just my opinion, sorry to interrupt.
No, that was true.
And
Issue.
many people have said he's very different in New York than he was in Taiwan.
Well, he considered us to be children, and he treated us like children. He was very gentle and very kind and very open with his teaching.
Yes, yes.
He expected much more from his Chinese students on Taiwan and the mainland.
Getting back to the issue of weight separation, I remember once I asked Ben, how high should you lift the empty foot to show that your foot is empty? He said, well, you lift your foot, but not the sole of your shoe. So it was, it's a very light demonstration.
Me, he told an inch.
An inch.
Yep.
I remember a quarter of an inch, but
yeah.
It's all the same.
I remember he laughed when he said that. So,
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Barry in New York. To separate your weight, you have to stand on your leg properly. So I was wondering if someone could describe if they have any good insights into how one stands properly in the legs and the quad, and what it feels like when your weights drop. Is it drop down or is it rotated around the hip? Could anybody have any insights into that?
When you relax, you feel your weight go down. If you relax everywhere, then the weight goes down everywhere. And more than that is difficult to say, but there is, I think, confusion about what double weightedness means. I have an interpretation which is not, I think, the common interpretation. And that comes from the archetype of double-weighted postures, which is the horse rider stance. So if you stand with the weight equal on both legs, then and torque your knees outward while torquing the feet inward, you're in a classic horse rider stance. And this is used in many schools, including many Tai Chi schools, in order to strengthen the legs. But Professor categorically forbade it in his school. There was no exercises in horse rider stance. And looking at it from an engineering perspective, and then putting the engineering perspective into the Tao Te Ching, there's a line in the Tao Te Ching which describes the people of the Tao. And in that line, it says something like, cautious like old men crossing a stream in winter. So if you visualize what crossing a stream in winter must be like, there are stones which are not quite above the surface. They've been worn smooth by the passage of water. It's winter and they have a glare ice coating on them, and the ice is wet continuously by the river. So they're extremely slippery surfaces. So as you put your foot down on it, all of the weight in the foot must go straight down. And if there's any wet pressure to the side, if there's any push outward in the foot, then the foot slips and you fall. So throughout the form, if you stay relaxed, the total amount of force that goes out in the plane of the floor is very, very, very small. And most of the weight exerted on your feet is straight down. To me, this is one weight, this is another weight. And not having pressure in the plane of the floor is not having the double weight.
But if you just drop the weight, you have to direct it into one leg or the other.
No. Your root is going to travel between the 2 feet. It has to be directed downward. It's the sum of the forces in the 2 feet on the line of your center of gravity.
One of the things I heard Mr. Liu say about this was he used the analogy of a farmer plowing a field, and that he said that the job of the oxen is the forward movement, that the oxen pulls the plow through the field. The job of the plow, because of its shape, is to do the turning motion. And the job of the farmer is to sink the plow into the ground. And so that he was advocating that it was really, if we do the sinking properly, the rest of it takes care of itself. The shifting and the turning come from that downward.
Here. Agree completely. And
I can say something to that.
Sure.
Daniel?
Oh, yeah. I think that was one of Master Leo's favorite things to say about getting weighted. But he wasn't talking about that in terms of the standing on one leg and rooting. That was more about how you move into a leg, and you were moving down below, not just the foot, but the entire leg is moving from underneath rather than on top of the leg. And so that that was something that he always liked to point out. And I also would like to say that this topic on rooting is very interesting, and I'm always amazed at how different people interpret the same thing in so many different ways. And they all could be right, but the Master Leo was very careful to distinguish standing on or rooting in a dead way and what he would call a hoja or a live root or a dead root. And so regardless of whether you're standing on one leg or you're moving from one leg to the other, it should never be dead weighted. Even if you're on one leg, it can't be dead. And that in its own way was a double weighted. If you're sitting on one leg, even whether you could lift the leg or not, it had to be alive. and that was something he stressed a lot.
Can you say something about what you mean by a live root versus a dead root?
I think it's that very similar to what was said just before, that you sink into the weight, and the weight the body has to be fluid even when you're on one foot. If you get on a leg and you just get stiff and stuck there, that would be a dead root. So even if you're doing a standing posture for 20 minutes, you should be able to move within that leg.
Great.
I'd add two thoughts to the original question about how do you get your weight down. One of the things I've observed over the years is most people confuse lowering the body with sinking. Lowering the body is lowering the body. Sinking is sinking. They're not the same. You can lower the body and not be sunk. You can always sink without lowering the body. And one of the other key things is to bend the head top. So when you're doing this, people tend to think down. Really, you need to think up as well.
Both at the same time.
Absolutely, and and you're not pushing your head up, you're hanging from the bow way.
So it's really.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
And the brother is mentioned about the life and the death movement. Because if you try to practice rooted, maybe you don't move anything, just stand still with the weight on one leg. But when you do Tai Chi, it's a life movement. Every movement needs to travel from one leg to the other, right? That's a life movement. And when we do the complete position, it will be horse stance. See, like 70 and 30. That's natural. You don't need to think about to put the 70 and 30. Actually, when you complete way forward and after you turn complete position, the posture will be naturally 70 and 30. I don't know, we practice rooted down in one leg. Whenever we are, not only do the Tai Chi, even you sit down, you have to wait on one leg. And then when you get tired, you shift into the other. That's my father said, whenever you have weight on one leg, you have another leg is empty. And also when you get tired, you can shift into the other. If you double weighted and when you stand for a while, you get tired and which leg going to shift? No leg to shift, right? So when we walk, we stand, we always try to be rooted down with one leg. That's a life rooted.
Yeah.
I don't know. My English is not very good. If I try to think about what my father said. Wherever you are, you have to have weight on one leg.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of times when we're standing in lines or things like that, it feels like this is a waste of time for me to be standing in this line, but it's also an opportunity to practice your Tai Chi, just standing on one leg. Anybody else? Other thoughts?
Yeah.
I'd like to say something, if I could.
Who's first?
Okay, right. Hi, Giles Rosbander from Berlin. I think people won't know me otherwise, but hi Redmond, we know each other. As regards double weighting, sure, the legs, the way what we've been talking about so far, like between the two legs, a shift of weight. My experience and my vision is that's really maybe the starting point between the two legs. But as far as I've understand double weighting in the meantime, I've quoted a few sources, but blah, 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 to begin with, that it applies to every part of the body, that the double weighting would equally, well, if we go back to what Redmond said, like a pair of scales, then, okay, on one hand between two legs, but equally, let's say we've got this here, then, for example, I mean, you know, under pressure, perhaps, then if here and here are equally yang, then I'm also going to be stuck double weighted. Somebody can take me to the ground with this. So just as much, you know, this can give way, and this can sink and give way, or this can sink and give way. If I'm stuck here, I'll also be double weighted, which will propagate through the body, or even here. If pressure comes in here, or a strike, a punch, this can turn, and this comes. So we've got the yin-yang separation, the full and empty, sinking with gravity, here and here, any part of the body. So my understanding, double weighting is every joint, every connection being like a pair of scales, be it big to small, and certainly the feet, the legs to begin with, but just as much through to any part of the body. I mean, somebody pulls me here, I've got to be able to react here and here, whatever. So that's what I'm basically saying. Legs, yes, but every possible joint through the body, in my experience. Over to you guys.
Great, great. Wonderful insight. Thank you.
I'd like to point out something, if I may.
I was going to respond to that, which is
Okay, go ahead.
the notion of the opposite hand, opposite foot, that the weighted foot, the other hand is the one that is the fuller hand. And so they move back and forth. They exchange as you exchange the weight. And it's also important to keep your hips and your whole upper torso turning, like I think of, it's like my hips are a bird bath filled with water. And if I tip or turn too fast, the water's going to slosh out. So it needs to be, you know, part of the turning process as well.
How do you turn without turning your hips? It would just be twisting your torso.
Like the big wheel around the, you know, the hips turn with the whole body above it.
Of course.
And they rotate like that big mill wheel that is discussed at various places.
Okay, so forgive me to go back. Consider two questions which arise, one with beginners and one with people who are doing push hands. If single weightedness is all of the weight is on one leg, if that's what's required in order to make a route, then every time that you go from your left foot to your right foot, you pass through a point at which there's the same weight on both feet. So in that moment, have you left principle? You have not left principle. No. If double weightedness is not just weight on both sides, it has to do with the direction that the weight is going, whether it's downward or it has a sideward component. So when you watch people do form and they finish a posture, ward off, single whip, any posture that's 70-30, and their back leg has straightened out in the act of going to that posture, that means that they have pushed themselves to that posture. If they're pushing themselves to that posture, then in the transition, they're double weighted. They're pushing outward at the same time that their weight is going down. Outward is one weight, downward is another weight. When you look at the 13 chapters, Professor goes to some discussion about what's going on with the hands. And in that chapter, it's either 4 or 7, I don't remember off the top of my head, he talks about triangulating the weight between the two hands, that it all goes effectively in one direction. And that model of the hands, even though there's weight in both, being triangulated in one direction, is also a model for the feet. So as long as, it doesn't matter if there's weight in both feet, as long as it's going in one direction. And that one direction is downward from your center of gravity.
Great.
In my humble opinion.
Now, no, we've got about 15 minutes left here. Are there some people who haven't spoken yet who would like to contribute?
I can take
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
I'd like to ask Liam, I think a few weeks ago, we were talking a little bit about rooting.
Nope.
You're
Sorry.
muted, Elizabeth.
We lost your audio.
Sorry. And so a couple weeks ago, you were talking about, you know, changing the route from one leg to the other. And you mentioned several ways. And one of those was from under the root, under the floor, under the ground. Did I remember that correctly? So Liam, I think you were the one who said that.
It seems to me that as I progressed, first it felt as if my weight was moving up from one foot and down into the other. And then when I got better, I felt as if the weight was moving across the floor. And when I got better than that, the weight seemed to be moving underneath the ground. And when I got better than that, there was no bottom. The weight was just down. But somebody else should be speaking.
Anybody else?
I have spoken before, but I would like to thank Katie Chang. If Katie is, this is Carol Schmidt. If Katie is still there, I'd like to thank Katie for what she just said about if you're sitting down, even if you're sitting down, one leg could be, you could feel your attention on one leg rather than the other. That was a novel thought for me. In my age, I'm welcoming new thoughts in my brain. So from Katie and from the professor, I thank you for that. And I have a comment that I would like to make. I've been trying to make it for quite some time. It's not about double weightedness. So before we leave, I would like to make one comment about something, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Which is, I so appreciated the session with about Robert Smith, because there were lucky few of us that were with Professor at Xijun, and we have had experienced our hearts together and our remembrances, our warmth of remembering these special times. But I didn't realize that there was, until that session, that there's this whole other group of people. Hey, it's not just us lucky few. People's hearts were so warm and so filled with their memories of Robert Smith that it filled my heart just to know that there's this whole other, and I'm sure for people, there's a lot of teachers like that. I look forward in the future to sessions about Maggie or other teachers, Carol McGonigal or others, that just, there's this whole heart-filled, warm thing for our teachers, not just those of us who are at Xijun. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I do think that what you said, all the teachers that I've studied with who studied with Professor Chung all attribute what they're offering to him. And I think that what you all experienced at Xijun is what we experienced with Robert Smith, what Maggie's students experience with her, Ed, Ben, all the other teachers. It really is a flowing downhill from Professor Chung. And I think all of them attributed what they brought to us to him. So I think when we're singing the praises of Robert Smith, it's really a reflection on to Professor Chung. Not that Robert Smith wasn't a marvelous human being in his own right, but in terms of the Tai Chi, I think that's something that he rained down through his students to that next generation of us. So thank you for that.
Rather than flowing down, maybe rippling outward like in a big pond. I mean, that's, I think, another analogy.
Much better image. Thank you.
This is Bob Burke. I wonder if we could contrast the major part of this discussion with something I'm curious about. That's when we're doing preparation and beginning. As you know, we're standing equally weighted 50-50 in each leg. And I remember my instructor using a term he called Wu Chi. And if anybody could speak to that, because I've kind of forgotten what that meant exactly. But I know that that time of the form is when you're sort of focusing and gathering your thoughts into into what you're about to do. And when you're sort of getting in touch with the Dantian, just preparing and getting ready. Would anyone like to talk about if this has something to do with the term Wu Qi, or what Wu Qi means exactly.
I can speak to that.
Okay.
Sorry, Daniel.
Yeah. The word Taiji means the great extreme. Ji is extreme. Wu means empty or lack of. So Wuji is the lack of any extremes. Taiji is having extremes. So before you start differentiating yin and yang or full and empty, there's a place of no differentiation, and that's in the sense of referencelessness. There's no left or right, no up or down. That's kind of a simple way to understand Wuji. And so getting into that posture before you go into your left leg or your right leg, that's Wuji. As soon as you make a thought or a mental or physical movement to left or right, then you're in Taiji.
It's the dot at the center of the Tai Chi symbol.
My
But
understanding.
even that is having a reference point. I think the true Wuji is no reference at all.
And Wuji is when we're standing with our heels together, right, Daniel? It's not considered when we have the feet parallel?
I think in most Taiji forms, it's before you move anything. So because in this Chen Manqing's form, he added that earlier move. So that's the move where Wuji is before you sink into your left or your right foot.
In one of
Excuse me,
Yang Cheng
how do
Fu's,
you write Wuji?
How do I write it? I could, if you have the whiteboard up, I could write it. Wu, if you in the Japanese Zen, they like to talk about mushin. It's the same mu wu, no mind or no extreme. It's the same
Without.
idea, same character.
it's without.
Without, lack of,
Yeah.
empty. So it actually doesn't mean empty. It just means lack of, not having.
So what I was told was that, well, first, there's at least one film of Professor, I think it's in a park in Taiwan, where he doesn't bother with lifting both hands before he proceeds into the form. And there's one book from Yang Cheng Fu where there's no description of lifting the hands both at the same time. And what I was told that is going on during the lifting, first, when you step to make your feet parallel, you're just getting ready to do the lifting hands. When your hands rise, it's because Yang is rising. And when your hands fall, it's because Yin is falling. So now you've made a fundamental division in your body between Yang high and Yin lower. And then the first movement makes a second differentiation in your body. And by the time you get to a full posture, you're a hexagram all by yourself.
So in that parallel foot stance where our weight is basically 50-50, the yin-yang lack of double weightedness is because there's a vertical separation of yin and yang as opposed to the
Double weightedness doesn't even come into the consideration. You are not doing Tai Chi yet. It's only when you shift weight, turn waist that you've begun to do Tai Chi. Before that, I was told you're doing a much older exercise than Tai Chi.
Okay.
Could we think of it as the Wuji as being the stillness and the Tai Chi as the motion that emanates from that?
I like that.
The beginning posture where you're before you lift the hands, then there was sometimes people would ask Master Liu about that. It said, isn't that double weighted? And he would say, well, one way to look at it is that you have more weight in this posture, more weight sinking down than up. So there's still like there's a vertical separation. He did mention that a few times. And so that was something I thought was quite interesting, because I think in Chen Manqing's book is kind of it's notated very strangely. So people would often ask about that.
Yeah, the strange notation is that each of the 2 feet
is weighted 30%.
That's
And
right.
when Professor was asked, is that a mistake? How can 30 plus 30 equal 100%? He said, no, that's right, 30%.
Yeah. So it's like 60-40 if you look at it, if you add up the two 30s on the bottom.
Yeah, 40% is up, 30%, 60% is down.
That's right. Yeah. So that was what he said.
One of the things I had heard about that beginning part of the form is that it's sort of a, in terms of numerology, it's kind of a recreation of the cosmology, that Wuji is represented by the empty circle and the number 1, and that when we separate the weight at the beginning, we're creating yin and yang. And as soon as you create yin and yang, you begin the exchange between yin and yang, which is the number 3, which is the qi moving between them. And that it's why we begin the form with an inhalation, because we're, as soon as we go from Wuji to separating the weight, that we're introducing life or movement into the form. And I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts or observations on that.
This is Barbara speaking. There's an interesting parallel to this in the book of Genesis in the Bible. And that there's a void for everything else. And then heaven and earth is created from that. It's exactly the same concept.
The upper firmament from the lower firmament.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, but you can also find something like that in some versions of Hindu mythology, where the moment of creation is the moment that time is introduced into the undifferentiated everything. The universe is undifferentiated. And in that moment of introducing time, the universe is shattered into the 10,000 things. And this is symbolized by the Sri Yantra. So this idea of there being a moment at which differentiation takes place is something you find everywhere, including embryology, as an example. I'm done.
Can I contribute something from Essence of Tai Chi Chuan?
Sure.
Tai Chi comes from Wu Chi and is the mother of yin and yang. In motion it separates, in stillness they fuse. It is not excessive or deficient. Accordingly, when it bends straight. There's more, but I think the first part illustrates that. And just to add, in the Hebrew Bible, the world was unformed and empty.
Undifferentiated.
Unformed and empty, yeah.
May I also make a quick point?
Sure.
So I think maybe a little confusion between the difference between Taiji and Wuji is that the romanization of Taiji is CHI, the Wade Giles early romanization. So people pronounce it Tai Chi. And it should not be that. That's a CHI was just the way the linguists were romanizing G, the way that it's the mainlanders now Pinyin romanize it as JIG. So Taiji and Wuji are just different aspects of G, if you could say. So it's not Tai Chi and Wuji. They're just they should be pronounced both G, and that maybe some people are confused by that. And I hear people saying Tai Chi is about that Chi is Chi, and it has nothing to do with that. It's Taiji. So I think
is that the third tone?
G is rising tone, second tone.
Thank you.
Tai is the fourth tone, sinking. So
what does Wu mean?
Wu means lack of, like just not having. So Tai means great. So the idea of Taiji is you have a division.
Great division, very good.
Yeah. So just wanted to mention that. That could just
Yeah,
the
no.
simple pronunciation can cause a lot of confusion sometimes.
And great,
Infinitely better than Supreme Ultimate.
great division is different than long division.
It depends on how many postures you do.
All right.
I just divide by 2.
Well, thank you all. We're just about out of time. Any closing comments from anyone?
On the subject of double weighted, I just add one thought that hasn't come up, that an aspect of double weightedness is also mental. And you tend to see this often in push hands, where people will be pushing, let's say, forward, but their eyes will be gazing off to the side. And that's a form of double weighting.
Wow.
Bring the eyes back makes a huge difference.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, the hardness that people very rarely overcome or have great difficulty in doing the form is the hardness of their conception of what the posture should be.
Okay. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for contributing to the discussion today with very, very enlightening insights from everyone. Just a quick reminder that next week, July 29th, First Third will be led by Maria Grazia Franzoni, and that'll be followed by a lecture from Barbara Davis on Cheng-Men Ching's painting. So it should be very interesting. I hope you all can make it again next week. Thanks for coming. Please invite your friends, students, teachers. Redmond will be closing the meeting out now, so take care, be safe. Don't forget that just because we're all opening everything up, the virus and how it's spread has not changed. It's still doing the same thing. So be careful out there, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very welcome.